Okay, so I'm going to get started and I'm going to welcome you all to Harpers Small Business Branding and Marketing Masterclass. So this is something of a follow-up session to one that we did a couple of weeks ago, looking at the importance of investing in PR and marketing spend to ensure long-term strategic growth. During that session, we were lucky enough to be joined by Facebook and the IPA, and their message was very much around maintaining share of voice and how crucial that is, particularly in times of upheaval and stress. At the moment, we're going through an unprecedented time, personally, professionally, and politically. So what we're going to look at today is how do you go about building that branding and marketing strategy from the ground up? And we're going to be looking at some best practice examples of how to do that and how to keep effective lines of communication open with your audience and on a smaller budget as well. So we're going to be hearing from the IPA again. Thank you, Simon, for joining us again. Simon's going to be talking us through the marketing journey, so the pitfalls, the best practice, and I think that's going to be hugely valuable at the moment. Businesses are trying to keep up with rapid consumer change brought on by lockdown, the pandemic. There's huge movement. Businesses are reassessing strategies, moving to new channels, and being faced with different ways of interacting with customers. So Simon's going to talk through that. And then we're going to hear from Claire Linford at leading media agency OMD. Claire has worked with brands like Google and Bacardi, and she's going to talk us through what advertising and advertising agency does, and how Claire's department uses insight and data in order to make the biggest possible impact for brands. And finally, we've got Jenna Osler, Head of Industry for FMCG and Alcohol at Facebook. She's working with some of the most established and innovative food and beverage brands in the UK. Jenna will be speaking about how businesses can maximise the chance of reaching the right audience at the right time on Facebook's platforms, as well as some of the things to consider when starting out online. And I know she's got some great tips and tools around responsible drinking and responsible advertising online, and how to do that. So I just wanted to say here also that this is a masterclass, so we're going to be having 3 presentations, one from each of our speakers, and then afterwards we're going to have chance for a Q&A session. So please do start to leave us questions via the Q&A throughout the session. I'll be collating them, putting them to the panel at the end. I think that's it really. So I think this is going to be an absolutely fantastic session, and we're going to have hopefully some examples of what big brands have been doing and how we can apply that and some of their success to small and medium-sized businesses. So Simon, can I hand over to you to kick us off with the marketing journey?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jo. I'm going to try it. Well, I'm going to attempt now screen sharing. So hopefully this will work. Now, hopefully you can see my opening slide there.
Yeah, great.
Sounds good. Perfect. So what I'm going to talk today about is a little bit about the marketing journey that most businesses will go on at some point in their kind of their cycles of development. I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks, a bit of background, and then also some kind of actionable, hopefully, insights. If you have any questions, I'll leave my email at the end, or we've got the Q&A. So just anything that's not clear, just do ask. Right, so we can click forward. So firstly, to start by saying, what is marketing? Because often marketing, and it was mentioned in the last webinar that we ran, it's seen as a kind of a nice to have, not necessarily an essential. It's been called kind of the fluff or the additional things that goes within the within product development and kind of the journeys of companies. And I would just say, don't turn off just yet. I know that's some people might be thinking, I'm a marketing director of 25 years experience. This is not for me. Hold on, there is more to come, so don't worry. So if we think about what the Chartered Institute of Marketing definition of marketing, it's the management process which is responsible for identifying, anticipating and satisfying customer requirements profitably. So if we think about that, it's not just about the kind of a post-production entity that you would that you think about at the last stage. It's really something that needs to be embedded into your processes right throughout the complete product journey, from innovation right through to delivery to customer. So it's a process which should be embedded into the culture of any business from the outset, and it really isn't just about advertising and selling stuff. So if the finance director is saying, oh, we want to cut marketing spend because, you know, we're not necessarily seeing the benefits of that, really think about how embedded that really is throughout your entire business. So a really important thing, I think, in any kind of marketing or communications is defining key objectives. So looking at the business objective of the company and then defining the marketing objectives from that. So most businesses will start off and they'll be thinking about delivering annual growth of an increased percentage, for example. Now, how do you translate that into actionable marketing objectives? Well, first and foremost, you need to be thinking about who you ultimately want to influence. What do you want people to do differently that's going to have an impact on the amount of product you effectively sell? What behaviors as well are you trying to encourage or discourage? Are they short-term behaviors? Are you looking to people just to quickly buy the product, or are you looking to build longer brand initiatives and to develop kind of more long-term relationships with clients, with customers, sorry. So quick examples of some marketing objectives. So for example, you might look at increasing sales by generating awareness amongst non-users. So not just going after the people who already buy your product or who think more likely to consider your product, but actually to look more widely at non-users. You might want to look at halting decline by getting lapsed users to reconsider. Particularly good objective there if you're looking at delivering that annual growth. Slowing possible declines by getting those infrequent users to buy more of your products and to really consider it much more frequently. And lastly, a good objective would be to maintain share by building a loyal customer base. And that's one of the underpinning factors, I think, that when we're thinking about brand building, it's not necessarily that activation or quick results call to action that we're talking about. Brand building is really much more of a long-term journey, and it's harder to quantify the results of brand building in the short term, but over the long term, you really do see the impacts. But of course, with great objectives, they require great strategies as well. So first and foremost, I'd be thinking about, with any brand, who's your target consumer, and try not to just think vertically. Don't just, if you're a Rioja brand, don't just go for people who drink Rioja or have a penchant for that particular type of wine. Think outside of that key target demographic and look at the other people who may be more likely to be influenced to consider that in the future. How would you describe as well the competitive environment, and thinking strategically of how you can position yourself relative to your competitors? And there we go, how you position yourselves relative to your competitors there. And of course, if you have precise objectives, that will lead to better strategy. And also the important thing is to have defined and measurable KPIs or key performance indicators that actually will say whether or not you've delivered against what you were hoping to do. Never forget, and this is one of the, I think the kind of the marketing mantra, it used to be the 4 Ps of marketing, but it's now the 7 Ps of marketing. So firstly, start with the product. So thinking about, don't market the product, but define the product through market research. So often commonly the journey will be, we've created this great new product and we now want to market it. Well, first and foremost, it's really important to consider whether the demand is likely to be there for the product and whether the market is really going to see it as a useful product. Thinking about pricing as well, it's important to be competitive within the category, but you never necessarily want to be the cheapest. If you immediately come in at the lowest point, then you'll be positioned as kind of the cheap alternative to a higher or better quality product. And so it's really important to consider the pricing. Place, and this is something that can often be overlooked. So where will customers buy or interact with the product? And it's something, especially within the lockdown and the current situation, that's increasingly important, because products which may have been consumed, for example, in the on-trade and now being consumed in the home, it needs to adjust the marketing strategy for how that product's going to be delivered to the consumer. In terms of promotion, this is kind of where advertising comes into it, but also about this is also about how customers will know about the product and how, for example, you may go beyond just paid advertising and marketing to actually look at ways in which you can get people to be aware of the product and what's going on. And think carefully, especially in the days of kind of influencer marketing and the ideas that you can reach a large amount of people in a quick amount of time with kind of a activation or call to action. Just bear in mind, anyone who's going to be representing the product will be seen as, to some extent, synonymous with the brand and effectively a face of the brand. So think of the people who are going to be representing the product, people who are going to be showing that showing an affinity to the product in public. How would that impact on your brand? And also think about other things that they represent. Processes as well. Think of the processes which are going to influence the customer's experiences and impressions of the product. How, for example, delivery would work for products which may have been delivered perhaps in the on-trade and now being delivered at home. And also think very, very closely about physical evidence. How will you define delivery for a customer? When does their customer journey end? And also, how will you define the delivery against the specific objectives? Another thing, I do love a good acronym. These are the, so set clear KPIs and marketing activities, which are SMART. So specific, know exactly what you're going to define as success from the beginning. Make sure they're measurable. So don't just rely on increase in sales, because often for brand building, that's going to be really, really difficult to tie that back. Make sure that whatever you're hoping to achieve is physically achievable. An important thing as well to consider is, can the business support increased levels of demand? So if you're suddenly to gain a large amount of market, a large amount of interest from customers, a large number of orders, do you have the physical infrastructure to support that? Make sure as well that the defined marketing objectives actually are able to be aligned with the overall business objective, because often it can be seen of the marketing objectives can kind of take a different turn that never really feeds back to the overall objective of the business, and can sometimes make communications a bit confusing. And lastly, make sure that everything that you do in terms of defining those marketing objectives is time bound. So define that period of successful delivery. And this is often the most difficult part. If you're thinking about longer term brand building campaigns, how do you define the time period within which you're looking to specify what is successful? Good advertising is not expensive. Expensive really means high cost, poor ROI, and ultimately poor value. What I will say though is bad advertising is expensive and it is poor value. So where can you get bad advertising? So that could come from a lack of strategy from the beginning, limited research, poor market awareness, limited customer insight, poor targeting, lack of brand purpose delivered so people don't really understand what the brand's about. Poor knowledge of competitors can sometimes lead to bad advertising. Mixed message creative is one of the common things that we've seen from case studies over the years. If a consumer is really not really sure ultimately what you want them to do, then they will find it difficult to actually do what you want them to do. Poor media choices as well. So if you're putting all of your budget into one specific media and expecting a particular thing to happen, but it doesn't really align with the media consumption of your target audience, that can lead to expensive, poor ROI advertising. This is a really good chart actually from the long and the short of it, which is written by Les Binet, kind of one of the founding fathers, if you will, of effectiveness. And it looks at the kind of the time periods and the impacts of short and long-term short-term activation versus long-term brand building. So activational marketing sees often quick results where it's a specific call to action. It may be a product sale, it might be a reduction and something like that with a directly linkable result. That often results in large impacts, which have effects are very obvious and efficiency is high, but ultimately they decay a lot faster. If you invest in brand building over the long term, you see effects immediately are less obvious, and that's the blue lines there is the brand building advertising, so not necessarily call to action. But brand really is the main driver of growth, margins and profit. And as you see the brand building, it's incremental with every brand building activity, and you see the increases there as well in those short-term activational sales effects as well. Don't see marketing and advertising really as short-term, and really do think about brand building and activation in harmony. If you read the long and the short of it, the book's a really good kind of a guide for anyone in marketing. The 60-40 measure refers to 60% of advertising marketing budget going into brand building and 40% in activation. And that really holds true from the IPA Effectiveness Data Bank case studies. Brand recognition is really, really important. And there's a quote I always like from Deborah Meaden from Dragon's Den fame, but obviously a phenomenal business person as well. The number one thing that you never want your customers to do is to think, because when they have to think about things, they talk themselves out of it. And if there's ever an element of uncertainty that they don't identify with the brand, they don't believe in what you're doing, they don't quite get what they're supposed to do, it's so much easier. Consumers will find it much easier to talk themselves out of something than to talk themselves into things. Short-term strategies are likely to appeal to only your current customers, and they won't really help you to gain market share without brand building. One thing that we know from previous analysis of recessions is that strong brands find it much easier to adapt to changing circumstances profitably. If you already have that brand synonymy for consumers, it's much easier for you to shift when circumstances change. Another thing as well, over-targeting, so going kind of really drilling down in a vertical way into your target market does limit growth. Broad reach is still really vital. So looking at broad reach media for profitable growth is really important. This is just a little example, and I won't go through the whole lot of this, but it was an example from when I first started my career about 10 years ago now. And that was as I was working for a national newspaper, and there was a gardening product client that came to us with a fixed budget. They wanted £20,000 for a full page ad at the front of the paper because that's what they saw their competitors doing. But they had no brand awareness. They'd never advertised before. They were looking at an immediate activational call, and they thought that they were going to have loads of people calling up immediately on an advert they'd never seen before, and they hadn't done any brand building advertising. So what we advised them to do was to split that budget down to running kind of against targeted editorial within the newspaper, quarter page adverts over a longer period of time. After the second advert that ran, the client was extremely unhappy. They said, we've had no calls, very little sales, we want to cancel. After the fourth advert actually ran, they called up to book for the rest of the year, and they amplified that call to action in their copy. So the brand was being recognized, they were building the brand, it was identified against gardening editorial, and it really worked. If you buy a certain Sunday red top newspaper, 7 years later, you'll see that they do still run ads with that same strategy all those years later. A few other things to really bear in mind is don't be a sheep or a sitting duck. So when competitors are cutting their marketing spend in times of recession or in times of economic difficulty, this is a really great time to buy cheap share of voice. So, and bear in mind always, competitors will be watching you as close as you're watching them to see what you're doing and to see where they can really gain market share. Previous recessions have shown this to be a short-sighted move to just cut advertising spend. Companies that maintain or increase their budgets in a recession will on average gain market share and hold on to their gains when the recession is over. This is a really good chart that shows if share of voice exceeds share of market, then brands will tend to grow. If share of voice is smaller than share of market, brands will tend to shrink. And to really bear in mind as well, share of voice is not necessarily share of spend. So really well-targeted advertising. This is not just for advertisers with huge advertising budgets. It really is a particularly good, well-targeted advertising and well-planned advertising does really lead to efficiency within marketing. Last sort of few bits before I kind of wrap up this section. Share of searches. If anyone caught any of the Effectiveness Week 2020 presentations, there's a really good one on share of searches as a great way to understand brand health and to really contextualize and predict your future market share. So Google Trends is a really good place to start for this. And what it will enable you to do is to see where your brand sits within your category and ultimately within the marketplace and ultimately within the future as well. By understanding share of search, you can really let insight drive innovation, as it's a really good predictor of shifts in market behaviors months ahead. So to calculate share of searches, the easy way to do it on Google Trends is just to look at your share of searches for your brand divided by share of searches divided by the total searches for your category. And that will equal the share of search. Now, for smaller brands with a lower mass presence, share of search is a really good predictor of your future share of market. And there's a really great presentation from Lesbinet on the IPA website, which is free to access, that was definitely worth tuning in for. So you can read all about that. We've got the book that I mentioned, the long and the short of it is available from the IPA website. The IPA F-Works is really good for understanding about effective marketing and some of the award-winning campaigns there. There's also a book that I did in partnership with Facebook called Making Sense of the Commercial Media Landscape on ipa.co.uk/making sense that will tell you all about commercial media and kind of the changing behaviours of UK media consumption. Now, lastly, I'm just going to run through a few slides from our IPA touchpoint study. This is kind of my day-to-day of what I work on, which is a large-scale consumer insight-driven survey that we run for 6,000 adults in GB. And what that enables us to do is to look at changing patterns of behaviour in relation to media, but also in relation to just daily lives and interactions. So what we did for 2020 is we were able to look at the behaviour of individuals before the lockdown and then as the country went into lockdown to give us an idea of what that would mean for brands. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about how COVID-19 and lockdown changed the status quo for marketing, what that means for brands. So for consumer consideration in the lockdown, we found that in the period of the lockdown versus the pre-lockdown, so it was 24th of March onwards until the middle of May, we found that time spent shopping was down compared to 30% compared to pre-lockdown figures. But we did find that when people were shopping, they're spending a lot more, and they were doing that in order to avoid having to go shopping too soon, and they were really considering the products they were buying more carefully than ever. We've also seen a 4% reduction in the amount of consumers saying that they can afford to splash out on luxury goods, so being particularly careful about what they're spending. Just in terms of consumer consideration in the lockdown, if consumers are looking to shop less, they'll create lists and be considering products at home. So brand consideration won't necessarily happen within the store. They'll be going in with a list, knowing what they're looking for. If consumers are going to be buying more products to last longer, they'll be thinking of meals in advance, and they'll also be looking to reduce extravagance. They'll be looking at the closest brand, which is going to deliver the nearest possible experience, but at a lower cost. And ultimately, where does this leave marketing spend? Where does this leave cutting marketing spend? Leave brands in times of increased consideration? We have found a particular thing. These are just some quick facts, that there is extremely increased scrutiny of brands by consumers within the lockdown period. We've seen 24% increase in the number of people saying they'll actively avoid unethical brands, and people really increases in concerns about climate change. And a particular thing that relates back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of how consumers are interacting with your products is, if you are going to be going direct to consumer, just bear in mind the attitudes towards unnecessary packaging and sustainability and the impact that could have on your brand. So 2020 has made us think again. Consumers are reevaluating their lives and acceptance of norms is changing. Brands ultimately need to be there in order to be considered and to really be aligned with consumer conscience. And as the current situation sustains longer, our kind of dominant understandings of consumers may no longer apply. And again, go back to it, where does that leave marketing spend in times of increased consideration? So thank you from me. I think I may have run over slightly there, and I do apologise for that. If you have any questions at all, I'm on simon@ipa.co.uk, or I'll be here to answer questions at the end. So thank you from me.
Oh, Joe, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. Sorry, I was just saying thank you, Simon, and we'll make sure that we circulate those tools and the presentation among you. So let's jump straight to Claire. Are you okay to jump in with your...
Yes, of course. Let me share my screen. Let's see if this works. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can, Claire. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so thanks, Joe, and thanks, Simon, for setting me up there for my presentation. So just as a quick introduction, I'm Claire. I work on the Insight team at OMD. If you're not familiar with us already, we're a media agency, part of the Omnicom group. And we've got lots of clients, as Joe mentioned, from a wide range of sectors that we plan and activate communications for. So today I'm going to talk to you about how we use different insight tools and techniques to ensure that we're marketing to the right audience with the right message at the right time, and essentially making our budgets work as hard as possible to give us the best chance of planning effective media. So some of the examples that I'll talk through are for alcohol brands, and we've got one example that isn't, but all of the processes that I'll talk you through are applicable to any brand and that we do across all of the brands at OMD. So most brands or media agencies will have a planning process to help them create the most successful media plans for their clients. So you might be familiar with something that looks a little bit like this. This is ours at OMD that we call design. And essentially we use this as a guide to ensure that we're putting in all of the groundwork needed to really understand our market and our audience to enable us to create those highly effective advertising campaigns. So starting off with ambition, this is where we set ourselves up to win by defining and aligning on business goals and looking at where the associated growth will come from, similar to what Simon was talking through just earlier. The next stage is empathy. That's when we decide who we're going to target, really where we understand and really get under the skin of our consumers and our target audience, and where we try to understand what the role of communications is in being able to achieve those goals that we've set ourselves up with in our ambition stage at the start. And then the next two stages are craft and activation. And this is where we take all of the lovely insights and information that we've gathered in our ambition and empathy stages and essentially create those media advertising campaigns and activate them so that we're continuously optimizing those campaigns and driving the highest performance that we can do through OMD and learning for any future campaigns with any learnings that come in from those advertising campaigns. So my role on the Insight team and the rest of the Insight team sits pretty firmly within the ambition and the empathy stages at OMD, those first two stages. It's really important to note that we do have a wide range of clients in the building. As Joe mentioned, we've got some really big clients, Google, McDonald's, etc. But we also have a few smaller clients as well, such as Alzheimer's Research UK. But no matter what size the client is or how much budget they have to spend on advertising, we ensure that this design process happens for each client to really make sure that we're gathering all of the insights, all of the information possible to make sure that we're putting ourselves on the right foot for success for our clients. So hopefully you'll find the rest of this talk interesting, and by the end of the talk you'll have some tips and tricks and some free tools as well that you can use to help boost success for your brands. So specifically today, I'll talk you through two examples of how we've used insights and techniques from our planning process to answer two different client briefs. So the first example talks you through some work that we did in the ambition stage, that first stage of design, really understanding the market and the audiences and identifying where the areas of growth will come from. And then the second example is from the empathy stage, which is the second stage of the design process, where we gather insights to really get under the skin of the audiences and understand specifically the right moments and the right mindsets that our audiences are in so that we can effectively target them. So the first example here I'm going to talk you through is market and audience understanding. So this was from one of our previous lager clients who, for the sake of anonymity, I'll just call brand X. So the client came to us with a brief, which was a smart brief, which Simon will be pleased with, as it was a very specific target of a 13% increase in sales next year for the following year, which equated to an additional 32 million litres of lager drunk of that specific brand. So before we dived in to look at what the strategy would be in hitting that 13%, we wanted to look at the bigger picture and align ourselves with the brief, truly understanding the market that we were in and the audiences, and essentially to really understand if that 13% increase in sales would actually be achievable. So starting with understanding the market, using Kantar's TGI data, which is in this chart here, we wanted to understand how many drinkers of the category there were in the UK, so in that chart on the left. And then also to get a bit of context, we compared this with wine drinkers, which is the chart on the right. And we also looked at how both of those were made up in terms of light, medium and heavy drinkers. So this was just a first step process. It gave us a rough understanding of the current potential market that was out there. But then we wanted to look at how our brand specifically were performing. So the red line on this chart shows you the market share of that brand over the previous sort of 10 years or so. And this data was shared with us by the client, so it was their first party data. And from this, as you can see, we could see that our brand was in decline. So the job of us increasing those sales by 13% was likely going to be one that was going to be a bit tricky. And then to further put this into context, we wanted to look at where our brand currently sat in comparison to the market, and really having that market context too. So we've plotted our brand's market share, that same red line, on top of the total lager volumes that were being consumed in the UK, which is being shown in those golden bars on the chart. And that data was gathered from Statista, one of our data sources. So looking at these two data sources together, we identified an even bigger task. So the volume of lager that was being consumed had been declining in the previous 10 years or so, but actually had started to increase back again over the more recent years. But our share of market continued to decline. So in this growing market of people consuming more and more lager, our share of market was still in decline. So this highlighted that we needed to work even harder and identify areas of growth within the category. It wouldn't just be enough to keep the current drinkers of our brand drinking the same amount or even a bit more. We needed to steal share from other places. So this led us on to the exercise, which is often carried out when we receive a brief, and it's one that any brand can do to understand where their potential sources of growth are. So this exercise is called demand mapping. So the principle is fairly straightforward, but there are a lot of numbers involved. So hang on in there if you can with me. So essentially, you identify, first of all, the number of people that you know are existing drinkers of your brand already. And then you look at two additional potential sources of growth. So the first is your adjacent audience. These are people who you've identified as being the most likely to try out your brand based on their existing purchase habits. So in this case, our adjacent audience are competitive mainstream lager drinkers who aren't currently drinking our lager brand. So in other words, they're the lowest hanging fruit. Technically, they should be most easily swayed into buying our brand in the future, as they're drinking similar products at the moment. But then the second growth audience, they're called our expansion audience, and they're slightly further removed. So these people might be engaging in the wider category or maybe a similar category. So for this example, the expansion audience are our premium lager drinkers. So they're not currently drinking our competitive mainstream lager, and they're not drinking our brand. So they're going to be a little bit harder to persuade because they don't buy our direct competitors, but they'll still provide an opportunity for us to steal from and for us to grow. So once we've identified those two potential areas of growth, our adjacent and our expansion audiences, we then want to size up both of those with our existing brand drinkers to really understand the potential that we're working with. So again, using Kantar's TGI data, we could see that there were 3 million drinkers of our brand in market. There were a further 7 million drinkers in our adjacent audience and a further 4 million drinkers in our expansion audience. So we know that we're not going to necessarily be able to convert all of our adjacent and all of our expansion audiences to our brand. So at this point, we look at the proportion of those that we need to convert to be able to enable us to hit our target. So we worked out in this instance that if we could convert 14% of our adjacent audience, and then a little bit less at 10% of our expansion audience, because they're a little bit harder to convert, then this in turn would increase sales by 22 million litres and 9 million litres respectively, which would then allow us to hit that target of an increase of 32 million litres. So although there were quite a lot of numbers involved here and we needed to know the average number of litres drank a year, etc., now that we've done that real groundwork with all of those numbers, it gives us a much clearer idea of the task at hand. And this exercise put us in a really good position to understand which audiences we needed to target, and also helped us bring back this brief to the client and with a really humanized view of the brief. And it was much easier to understand the task this way versus just looking at a percentage sales growth that we were aiming for. So that was an example of how we clarify and define the goals to understand the task at hand. Once we understand where we're going to get that growth from, we move on to our empathy stage, where we gather as much information as possible about our audiences and how best to target them. So I'm now going to talk you through an example from a different client of how we used our understanding of moments and mindsets of our consumers to make sure we're hitting the right audience with the right message at the right time. Oops, sorry. So this client brief was from a children's entertainment brand, and they wanted to know how we could engage a little bit better with mums, specifically of primary school children. So we'd already done all of our research in the ambition stage for this brief, and as mentioned, we knew that it was mums of primary school children age that we wanted to target. And we already had a whole host of insights from the IPA touchpoints data about mums. So specifically looking at their media habits, these charts demonstrated that mums had a higher share of time on social media versus the general population. So we can see here that social media actually took up over a quarter of their share of media time versus just 15% of all adults. Then more specifically, again, using IPA data, we found that mums over-indexed on average hours spent on Facebook and also on Instagram as two of the social media platforms. And then we also overlaid this touchpoints information data with data shared by Facebook, which demonstrated that most UK parents, over half, watched video content specifically on social media at least once a week. So gathering all this data together, we knew that video content, specifically on Facebook and Instagram, would be key to engaging with this audience. So next up, we wanted to understand when would be the most effective time to do this for messaging specifically around children's entertainment. So using time diary data, this is from Touchpoints again, we wanted to understand what activities mums were doing during the day and when they were doing them. So here's a graph that helps us understand just that. So it helps us understand the mindsets that mums are in throughout the day. So that red line that you can see on the graph is time spent looking after their children. So this peaks in the morning at about 7 a.m. approximately as children wake up. And then it continues until approximately 7 p.m. When the child goes to bed. And then once we had an understanding of when they'd be looking after their child and in childcare mode, we also wanted to see if whenever mums get a chance to actually relax. And we found that relaxation mode, which is that grey line there, really kicks in post 7 p.m. once the kids have gone to bed. So this really highlighted to us this lovely 12-hour childcare window from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. when mums would be very much in mum mode and thinking about their children. But it also tells us that post 7 p.m. mums are kind of out of their childcare mode. They're less likely to be open to content around children and children's entertainments because they're really in relaxation mode then. So understanding those moments that mums would be in their childcare mindset and when they'd be most likely to then also be in their me mode really helped us inform our media plan. So using that knowledge, we were then able to recommend to the client that we would use a burst of activity, video content on Facebook and Instagram to build awareness and consideration of our brand's products, but ensuring that all of that content was only delivered at a really tactical time of day. So avoiding that post 7 p.m. slot. So our client was really happy with this as there was no wastage of delivering the content to the mums who would be receiving it. They'd be seeing it, but they would be completely switched off to that type of content as they wouldn't be in the right mode to receive that. So those are the two whistle stop examples that I wanted to talk through with you today. I appreciate that was done quite quickly, but I really look forward to the panel where you can ask any further questions that you might have. And just to say throughout the talk, I did mention a couple of tools that we'd use to get to those insights and those points, one of which obviously was IPA touchpoints that Simon's talked through with you as well. But a couple of others such as Facebook Insights to Go and Statista. There's a lot of free content on those sites. So just after this, I'll be sharing with Joe some links for you to use that you can go in, have a look around yourself, and it can really help inform those plans. So thank you so much, Joe. And I look forward to hearing Jenna speak next.
Great, thank you so much, Claire. And I think that was really interesting to see how some of those moments that you're able to map there, and how that correlates obviously to what kind of mindset the consumer is in, particularly later in the day, more inclined to pop open a bottle of wine and to relax.
Exactly.
Yeah. Really target those specific drinking occasions. So that was great. And also interesting to see how some of your how the demand mapping and the way you do that is basically the same for large businesses as it is for small.
Exactly.
You can totally transplant that no matter what size business you are. So that was great. Jenna, I think there's quite a lot there that you're probably going to pick up on as well. So please take it away with your presentation, Jenna. Jenna, I think we might you might just be prepping still, but oh, you're off mute. There you are.
Can you see my screen okay?
I can, yes.
Sorry, you would think after the multiple video calls I've had, I would be able to do screen share and mute. So I apologise to everybody.
Yeah.
All good, great. Hi everyone, thank you so much, Claire and Simon, for a fantastic overview of the market and opportunities for brands. So I'm Jenna, I work at Facebook, and I spend my time with large clients across the food and beverage industry. I also look after the major alcohol brands in the UK and work directly with them and their agencies, like where Claire works. So it's mine and my team's job to build partnerships with brands and help them use our advertising solutions across Facebook, Instagram, and Messenger. And we help them advertise to our community of 3.1 billion people who use our apps and services. So when Joe and I talked about what I was going to cover today, I could have spoken for hours, but you will be relieved to know that I have put this into 10 to 15 minutes. And hopefully this will give you some insights, some trends we are seeing, and some takeaways, which I can send around afterwards, of how to get started if you haven't already on our platforms, and how to learn more. At Facebook, the way we approach every action starts with our mission, which is give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. People use Facebook to connect with their communities. They use Instagram to express themselves and find inspiration. And they use WhatsApp to communicate with their closest circles. And during the pandemic, which we're sadly still in, technology and social has really given us the connection that we crave from people. The tools that we have built at Facebook means that any business, no matter what size you are, can use our platforms to reach new customers and connect with a community of people. 180 million businesses use our tools to connect with people and find customers. And I'm sure I don't need to tell the people on this call that COVID has been a really challenging period for the drinks industry, with out-of-home consumption declining in profitable areas such as pubs and restaurants. Whilst people have been spending more time at home, brands have really needed to adapt to this changing landscape. And the desire for connection has never been more needed, and this has manifested itself in a number of ways. More time on your mobile, more time on social media, not just our platforms, but all platforms, spending more time with messaging. I bought my parents, who are in their late 70s, a Facebook portal just at the height of lockdown, because they just weren't that technologically savvy. And I wanted to be able to see them. And I wanted to be able to have a gin and tonic with my dad. Something that I've really, really missed during this time. And all of us have had to find new digital skills to live and to communicate. And when it comes to people, there are two things to think of at this time. So firstly, what has really changed in people's lives? And this data is from April, so really sort of height of lockdown. And it shows the acceleration of buying groceries online, buying takeaways, definitely buying more snacks. I certainly have been. And an acceleration of commerce has just been across all categories. And you can see alcohol here at plus 54. We've actually seen years of commerce acceleration happen in a matter of months. And digital transformation for all brands is happening right now. And the second thing is that people just aren't discovering products in the same way that they were, which was mentioned in the previous presentations. So there's been a real change with brands of who they're sort of speaking to and thinking about the audiences that they're targeting. So every audience, so no matter who you are, whether you're me, whether you're my parents, have learned new ways to use digital to meet their needs. New digital skills and new activity has created a wealth of signals across our platforms. Some is functional in terms of like online grocery shopping, using messaging to speak to businesses. And there's been a real adapt and change across marketing. So this is a change from what used to be traditional signposts in marketing. So you would see that advertisement, then you'd find that product, to using data and signals powered by AI and machine learning to predict what people could need, what people are interested in. So letting products find people across our platforms. And at the height of discovery commerce and the discovery economy is the mobile phone. So I talked about the rise of usage of smartphones. This is now the largest and most sophisticated shop window, and it's right in your hand and it's with you all the time. So by creating a wealth of data and signals with people being online a lot more, every business can now be digital and mobile first and connect their products and services to reach the people that matter to their business. So people come to Facebook to watch content, you come to connect with your friends, you come to find inspiration. And during COVID, businesses have really had to think digital first. How are they going to deliver their products and services to the people that matter to them? So clearly understanding and responding to these changes in consumer behavior is a critical part of all of our jobs. Whether you're a marketeer, whether you're us at Facebook, as a business, is understanding what's changing with your consumer. And with the recent changes that we've seen in the category, it's now even more important for brands to identify what role they can play. And not every role will suit every brand. And Simon mentioned in his presentation, and really finding your purpose. What do you want to stand for? What do you want to stand up and stand out for? And to achieve this, you need to look across the people that you want to target and see what's happening in their lives and how you can be part of it. So I talked a bit about what's happening in the commerce side of the business and really seeing that increase. And I just wanted to sort of just talk about some of the trends that we're seeing. When I was talking to Joe about this presentation, we were talking about, what's changed during this time and what things can brands and businesses look into. So definitely a change in sort of how people have been consuming at home. Definitely been a lot more recipe content, how to make a great cocktail. That can be organic, could be part of ads. Concerts and sports has just totally changed. But how can you bring that moment when you're normally together in a community online? And 32% of UK alcohol consumers discover new alcoholic beverages on our platforms and surfaces. So one thing that I've definitely been talking to quite a few of my clients about is, how do we support the opening of the on-trade, such an important part of the alcohol industry. An important part of the fabric of our life and our community is being able to go and spend time with the people you care about in the places you love. And I wanted to just show this example, and it's from a burger restaurant in New York. But the reason why I wanted to show it was they have, and I can send you the case study so you can see in more detail, but they have 4 restaurants in New York. And what they did was they wanted to drive footfall into their business. And they did this through incentives. So they used Messenger, a great way of being able to send a coupon to a person that they wanted to target. So, I remember when you used to cut coupons out of magazines. Now you can have it sort of directly on your phone and go and use it. It's just a really nice way of thinking about different ways that you can encourage people, when safe, to go into a restaurant or a store. And one thing that we definitely saw across our platforms, and also I think across the world, was this sense of community and coming together, and how you could support. So how could you as a person support your local businesses. And we have a whole wealth of resources at Facebook to help support businesses, large or small, which I'm very happy to share. And I just loved this example from Carlsberg. So how they could support pubs. And it was just a really lovely way of helping the economy. You could have a Dr. Keg initiative. So for every beer enjoyed at home, consumers could scan the label and add it to their virtual keg in return for a real beer when the pubs opened. So I've talked a bit about trends, and as I said before, there was quite a lot that we were looking to cover. And I just wanted to just talk through sort of very briefly how easy it is to get started on Facebook. So Facebook's Ad Manager is an online interface which enables you to create and run campaigns. You can also run them directly from your Facebook page as well. And it's really easy to set up. So you set your objective. So just what we talked about with Claire and Simon, choose the audience that you want to reach, and it's easy to design the ads themselves. I'm just going to pause, Joe, to make sure, is my internet okay? It is.
Yeah,
right.
I can hear you fine, Jenna.
Perfect. Very blurry in the corner, so I just wanted to make sure that you could still hear me. Perfect. So Joe mentioned at the beginning that we've built tools to allow advertisers to advertise responsibly. And we've done a lot of work in the alcohol industry. So through Ads Manager, which I've just gone through, we have tools in place to reach the audiences that you want to reach. So going back to that example in terms of delivering footfall, so you could target really sort of locality or you can target more broad. Age targeting, so really important for all the alcohol brands that I speak to, is being able to advertise responsibly. And age targeting is available for all ads, and we default to 18 plus. Facebook pages and Instagram accounts can also be age gated, which means that nobody under the certain age that you've gated it to will be able to view that content. And all ads on our platform go through an approval process. And we work really closely with IARD, the International Alliance for Responsible Drinking, which is created by the 12 beer, wine and spirits CEOs. And they had 3 main objectives. So looking at how brands big and small can advertise responsibly, giving people choice to opt in and opt out of advertising if they need, and making sure that we're coming together as an industry to help brands and consumers. So we want any ads that people see to be as interesting, as useful to you as possible. And there's lots of examples of things which determine the ads that we show people. So it could be your activity on Facebook, it could be your age, could be your location, and Facebook will automatically show your ads to people who are most likely to find your products relevant. And you can deliver to the various target audiences that you want to reach. As Simon mentioned, audience is always much, much broader than you think. And that's definitely something to think of, is who you might think is going to buy your product. There will definitely be people outside of that are important to help your brand grow. And I just wanted to touch very quickly on creative. It's definitely something that we talk to clients a lot about, is, what does good creative look like? And a mobile is very, very different to a TV, and how do I get it right? So here are just 5 really quick steps of things to think about, and thinking yourself about which ads have stood out to you. So get your brand in straight away. People know it's an ad. It's fine to put your brand in. Optimize the screen. So think about how you hold your screen. You will hold it vertically. Use that screen real estate. Think about mobile first. We've just talked about digital transformation. Everyone's on their phones. Design for sound off, and grab user attention. So whether that's an offer, whatever brand and business you are, there's plenty of options that we can help you with. And then just really quick takeaway, just things to think about. Have you got an online home for your business? Do you have your Facebook page, Instagram account? What does that look like? and think about how you can reach new audiences. I've talked through creative. Visit our Facebook for Business site. It has a wealth of information on it, including success stories of brands that have done this really well. We also have an online training course called Blueprint, which is amazing. And it's a series of videos, and I've put together a getting started pack as well, which I can share after this. So thank you very much for inviting me today, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Brilliant. Jenna, thank you for that. And we actually have a great question from Alistair Morell at Cider is Wine here, asking about what you're saying about the coupons for businesses. What about with alcohol brands? Are you allowed to share alcohol vouchers via Facebook?
I would veer on the side of caution and say no. For restaurants, it would be different because of food, but for alcohol, I would want to double check that, but my initial thought would be no for the moment, but let me check.
Okay, thank you. And I know obviously we're going to share those tools as well, which will have more information about the age gating and things like that. Great. I think we're going to have about sort of 15-20 minutes of questions. So if anybody would like to ask anything else, please, now's the time. We did have actually a really good one sent in to us earlier that maybe I could shoot back to you, Simon. It's a pretty sort of specific one, but it kind of relates back to a lot of what you were talking about with e-commerce and marketing strategies. So we've got a question here about somebody's recently launched a new e-commerce site and their marketing strategy is driving visitors to the site. How do we get marketing right to achieve a better order conversion rate? Si, is that something you could pick up?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in. I mean, there's. I think everyone could certainly add probably more than I can even on that one. I mean, a big thing that I would say for driving conversion rates on e-commerce sites is really to think about the kind of the user experience and the journey that the consumers are going on. I mean, the biggest thing, if you look at, I mean, there's some really good studies that have been done in terms of looking at abandonment rates. So how much goes into basket and then never gets checked out. And a lot of it is down to kind of poor user experience. If you look on Amazon, for example, the one-click buy, it's incredibly quick. There's no kind of, you think, actually, I wouldn't even bother adding it to the cart, because there's always that opportunity, as the wonderful Deborah Meaden said, for the consumer to talk themselves out of it. And once it gets into the basket, you go forward and then you think, hang on a minute, now I've got 4 or 5 things in there. That's added up to a lot more than I was initially hoping for. Oh, should I take one out? If I take one out, I might as well take the lot out. And then you end up with an empty cart again. Whereas with the one-click buy, it really does translate much easier. So I would just say really optimize, and to echo what Claire and Jenna have said, optimize for kind of that best possible user experience. If it is delivered on mobile, make it as easy as possible for your consumers not to have to think, and really to just go straight forward and make that purchase.
Yeah, does anybody else want to pick up on that, Claire or Jenna?
I was just going to say there's quite a lot of interesting behavioural economics norms that you could probably look at to help with consumer experience online, etc. There's loads out there. A few people, if you're not already following, that you should do on LinkedIn or Twitter, is Richard Shotton, does some really interesting content, and Dave Trott as well, both quite just really interesting people to follow in general, but they talk about different behavioral biases that you can use sort of throughout the consumer journey. But I think for e-commerce and online, it is quite interesting too. Things like the von Restorff effect, which is basically, it's very simple, but it's things that stand out, gather more attention, which sounds very obvious, but for things like your buying buttons to be different to the rest of the content on the website, or just things to stand out a bit more to grab attention and be more likely to nudge people into those sort of behaviors that they don't necessarily, again, like Simon says, think too much about, and they're just drawn to it to do. And things like framing, how do you frame different packages? So if you have 6 wines for a certain price versus you can buy them individually, for example, how do you frame that is a better offer? And there's loads and loads of content around that. I would definitely say to have a little look into behavioral economics and see if that can help you out with consumer experience.
Great, thank you. And actually, there's I've got a question as well, just about, obviously we've seen businesses massively reassessing their strategies this year. People are at home, so we've seen a lot of direct to consumer pivoting. And obviously alcohol has to be incredibly careful about how it engages with people online. So my question would also be around how big has that become on, maybe Jenna, on your platform as well? And we've also got, that kind of ties into another question here about how, because obviously you're not allowed to sell Facebook alcohol on a platform like Facebook, how do you then convert social media followers to actual purchases off the site? Jenna, could you maybe pick up on that?
Yeah, of course. So it's a really good point, and thank you, Alistair, for highlighting that as well. So the differences between the advertising policies and the commerce policies. So looking at just sort of alcohol holistically, often there hasn't been a route to market. So the route to market has been via the pubs and via the restaurants. So advertising has been around, for example, when we used to be able to watch live sports, would be around marketing around that and making sure, you were getting footfall into pubs that were showing the games, for example. And so it's a couple of ways. So one could be through a spirits retailer. So that would look like you wouldn't be selling it directly from like a platform, for example. So it could be that in terms of commerce. And then what we have seen in the market is there has been a lot of acquisition to get that direct to consumer channel. But you're absolutely right in that alcohol, as we know, is highly regulated, and it's highly regulated for a reason. And that's why we spent a lot of time as a business partnering with the International Alliance for Responsible Drinking about how to make the tools available so that brands can advertise responsibly across not just social platforms but online platforms and as well. And I'm very happy to share, I did put a link in there, but I'm not expecting anybody to have written it down, was an alcohol blueprint which actually looks at our policies. And I've got a lot in this area that I can send over, and I'm very happy to have that conversation offline if anyone would like to.
Mm-hmm. Great. And we've also got another question here from William about main platforms for discussing drinks and cocktails and things. Jenna, I know obviously Facebook has a lot of different platforms, but is there anything, obviously we've seen a lot of this, we've seen cocktails being made at home, and it's something that you all touched on about the sort of the change in terms of the kind of content that people expect from brands. It kind of ties into another question as well about what's the kind of conversations that are engaging. I think in our last session, Pete was saying that there's perhaps a certain amount of COVID fatigue happening. So although the conversation is still very much around health, and we've seen a lot of immune boosting drinks, CBD is a big trend, all of these things that are landing. But what are the things that you're using that's engaging, and is there an outlet for things specifically like drinks and cocktails? Have you seen those emerge?
So I think I'm going to sort of look at that question in probably a couple of parts. So I think the first is, full disclosure, I obviously spend a lot of time on our platforms. So I am probably going to come to it with a bit of a Facebook and Instagram that in advance. So I know that the brands that I engage with, I've really loved the cocktail recipes. I'm not very good at stuff like that, and I've been able to do it, and it's been easy. And back when we were all having lots and lots of video calls and parties and quizzes with our friends, that would be what the go-to. I think going back to the other point that I would probably sort of touch on, and I think Simon, you touched on it, was around responsibilities with influencers. So influencer marketing is certainly a growing area for most brands, and in particular for alcohol brands, there's certainly been a real focus on making sure that the influencers that you're using responsibly, and that nobody under legal drinking, legal purchase age is able to view that content. So I think the trying to bring the outside into your home is the way that I kind of look at it, because I can't go, well, haven't been as much to a nice cocktail bar, so how can I bring that into my home? Ordering of wine online, like on an online wine platform, has absolutely increased with people. We've seen, you see that in a lot of the stats that are around from various research companies, and probably trying something new. So certainly in the height of lockdown, when you were going into a grocery store, you didn't always have the choice. You couldn't necessarily buy the brands that you always did because they might have been sold out. And that's why it's so important to have that mobile strategy, so that you're in somebody's hands when they're making those decisions. So they would be, so I'm afraid I've mixed a bit of personal there with some research. So I hope that was helpful. And we've got some customer journey stuff that I can share as well around the trends that we're seeing more widely.
No, that was great. Thank you, Jenna. And I think, we've seen like, because of the squeeze that happened earlier in the year, it's really opened up people to independent merchants. It's opened up a sort of a whole other sort of niche world, and people have accessed different parts of the wine and sort of spirits catalogue, if you like, that they wouldn't necessarily before, with the supermarkets was their first point of call. So there's a huge amount of opportunity there on platforms like Facebook and many others as well. Simon and Claire, did you want to pick up on that as well, about some of the insights-based stuff that you've seen? What's really engaging in terms of content? Are we seeing COVID fatigue? What are the main things that you're seeing engage in terms of content?
Sure. So actually on that question, I would possibly flip it on its head a little bit. So the main platforms for discussing drinks and cocktails and where people are talking about that, potentially flipping it on its head and look at who are drinking the drinks and the cocktails that you're wanting to sort of market, and then look at which platforms they're using, and look at the moments and mindsets of when they'd be open to talking about cocktails and wine and the like. So it's first of all finding out who it is that you're wanting to go after before going straight to the platforms, understanding who it is and what the message is that you want to, give out, and then look at which platforms people are most likely to be using, and what times or moments, as mentioned in the presentation, the moments and mindsets that people are in, that they're going to be most open to converting into those considerers or those those purchases. So back to Jenna's point of the mobile being in the hand, that's a great moment that we need to link up and make sure that it's the right person, the right moment, and the right message. So it's kind of putting it on its head at first and flipping it over, and then carrying on with those cherry picking of the platforms, etc.
I think that makes complete sense, because I think we often get asked, especially because the wine and spirits industry is made up of a huge amount of sort of medium to small size businesses, SMEs, and often don't have huge marketing budgets, especially at the moment. And we often get asked, where should I allocate that? Should it be spreading sort of my eggs in different baskets rather than putting them all in one? Should I be doing a little bit of social, a little bit of out of home marketing, a little bit of print of advertising? How should I approach that? And I think that's absolutely right. It's starting with who is your target consumer, and then that will inform that strategy. Simon, do you want to comment on that as well? Where, if you're a small business, how should you approach allocating your perhaps shoestring marketing fund?
Well, I think kind of to follow on what Claire and Jenna have said, it's thinking strategically doesn't necessarily mean spending a lot of money. It means really spending money well. So you can spend a small amount of money, but if you actually use platforms such as Facebook, or if you target those ads really well, and by that I don't mean narrowly target to a specific group of people, but actually to those mindsets and those moods, then you'll have kind of much more effective marketing. A particular consideration, I know when we country went into lockdown, it was an immediate assumption then that out-of-home media, kind of all budgets were pulled from out-of-home media, and it was slightly problematic because what you were actually finding was while there was less distance in where people were seeing out-of-home advertising, actually they were spending a lot of time standing outside of their supermarket in the presence of out-of-home media, or much more localized in what they were doing. So when they had restricted amount of times that they were going out, they were actually going to much more kind of smaller local businesses, which they perhaps hadn't done before. And then those local businesses were then finding that content, that the things that they were purchasing from them were then being shared on social, for example. And there was a kind of an amplification factor, which then, as we moved more into the kind of the in-home commerce phase of the lockdowns, it really developed, that those smaller businesses were able to capitalize on because of the shareable nature of what people were effectively creating, trying to replicate the experiences. So I've gone a bit around the houses there, but yeah, hopefully I've answered something.
No, that absolutely made complete sense. I think we've got through all of the questions we've been asked so far. I wonder if there's anything sort of specific you wanted to kind of, any of our fantastic speakers you wanted to pick up on as a kind of a bit of a roundup. Maybe that might be useful actually, if we could go around and sort of just sum up a couple of sort of key takeaways from the discussion today. Simon, why don't we start with you? What would you say, I suppose when we started looking at this session, we started thinking about how really businesses could keep those lines of communication open with consumers at the moment. Incredibly chaotic time really for everybody. People having to massively rethink about how they're reaching consumers and keeping up with sort of constantly changing consumer behaviour. What would you say is a sort of what would you summarise as some of the sort of the key things to be aware of at the moment for businesses looking to do that?
Yeah, I'd say, well, first and foremost, I'd say for businesses really to think, to go back to kind of the beginning part, is to really think of marketing as not just kind of an end product or an end process, to think of something that's embedded all throughout the product creation, because ultimately you can create the most wonderful product in the world, but if there's no way of delivering it, or if nobody knows about it, you're not going to sell much and you're not going to make much money. So I would say to really consider marketing as kind of throughout the whole product. And my rule or my way of working would be, if you have product to sell, do not cut advertising and marketing spend, immaterial of the circumstances. But I think it's really an investment that needs to be maintained. You don't want to lose that share of voice, because it will be so much harder for businesses that do lose share of voice or share of market to recover afterwards. So making those investments now in the kind of the tough circumstances to really think of kind of forward-facing growth of the business, and actually avoiding kind of quick knee-jerk reactions, again, would be another thing as well. I'd say if you're thinking about corporate social responsibility strategies, then make sure that they become embedded in the same way as your marketing into the ethos of the company, and don't just kind of react, don't go in a reactive kind of short-term approach. Really think about the long-term impact of brand, and I'd say that's what I would take away potentially.
Great, thank you, Simon. And Claire, so what are the key takeaways? What do businesses need to be aware of? What's the key thing at the moment as businesses keep these lines of communication open with their audience?
Sure. So I guess kind of echoing what Simon said as well as advertising not having to be expensive, neither does insights and research necessarily. So there's such a wealth of information out there that possibly people don't necessarily know about or know where to look. So obviously we've heard from Simon from the IPA, and they've got loads of resources talking again about share of voice, share of market, which is really interesting and really helpful. There are other bits Simon again mentioned, I think things like Google Trends, the whole conversation around how share of search actually can be a good predictor of share of market in the future is an interesting one, and also an easy one to quickly check for your brands just by looking on Google Trends, another free website for you to use. So again, one that is quick and free. It's not expensive for you to keep on track of and look at. Other amazing sources that are also free, things like Statista, the ONS have loads and loads of information and stats about your market. So before, again, echoing Simon, before any knee-jerk reactions of anything, pulling insights, pulling advertising, pulling whatever you might be thinking of in these quite difficult times for a lot of people, there are lots of things that we can be doing on not a huge budget that will be really invaluable for your brands. So I will send around a list of things that we use day in, day out at OMD, which are either low cost or no cost insights, which Joe will be able to share around with you. But I think that would hopefully be my main landing point, is that you can still do all of this background info and insight checking, and you'll be in a much better position for doing so.
That's brilliant, Claire. I know a lot of those resources are things that people may have not heard about, and people obviously going through this process now may be reassessing their marketing strategies or starting from scratch. So this is a great sort of starting place to reinvigorate your strategy. Jenna, did you want to kind of sign us off with some just a key point or two, a key takeaway for what businesses should be mindful of at the moment?
Of course. Well, that's pretty difficult to follow, Claire and Simon. For me, it would be, I mentioned in my presentation that digital transformation, it's happening now. It's here. And I would be thinking about what your presence is. So what's your digital strategy? What's your presence online? What does it look like? How are you communicating with people that maybe aren't able to come and visit you physically? And what does that look like? And then just the second thing would be, it can, I hope in the presentation I was able to talk through that the tools that we have, they're there for the small businesses, the medium business and the large, and it's really easy to get started. And I can share with you resources of how to do that. But it's, now's as good a time as any to start. And there's lots of outlets that you can learn, and there's like a whole community to connect with. So that would be my closeout.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've almost pretty much kept it exactly to time. We will obviously follow up with all those amazing resources that our fantastic speakers have mentioned by email. So do bear with us. That will be coming around very, very soon. And hopefully you've all got my email on the mailer that we sent round. It's joe.gilbert@agilemedia.co.uk. Please do, if you have any follow-up thoughts or questions, send me an email and I'll do my best to get them answered for you. So just to finally say thank you all for joining us, and we'll catch you all very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Claire, Simon, Jenna.